A real story, eh? Not like those made-up ones. All right, come sit here by the fire, little one. This is a tale not from a book, but from the whispers of the wind and the dust on the roads, from a time long, long ago when I was just a sprout, much like you. A time when the very threads that held our world, Edoran together, were tested like never before. It all began with the Empress. Now, you won't read about her in your nursery books, not the true stories anyway. She wasn't just a queen on a fancy throne, no. The Empress of Edoran, she had a magic, a power deep within her that was like the roots of the oldest tree, weaving through the very soil and sky, binding our land together. It was said that as long as her light shone bright, Edoran would flourish. But there are always shadows, little one. Always things that envy the light. And in those days, a terrible darkness stirred. There was a demon, whispered to be a fragment of an old hungry god. Some called him Zarthus, though that name was spat out like poison. And he found a helper, a mortal woman, but one whose magic was as wild and untamed as a storm. Her name, I heard tell it was Lysandra. This Lysandra, for reasons only darkness knows, worked with Zarthus. They couldn't destroy the Empress, not outright, but they concocted a wicked spell. A sleeping spell, they said, to put her out of their way. But magic, especially dark magic, is a tricky, unpredictable thing. Instead of simple sleep, the spell plunged the Empress into a slumber filled with the most horrifying nightmares imaginable. And because her magic was so tied to the land, her nightmares didn't just stay in her head. Oh no, they leaked out, twisting reality, bringing monstrous, impossible things into our world. The land cried out, twisted and broken by these living nightmares. Chaos reigned. Terror walked hand in hand with the dawn. That's when the heroes rose. Not the ones in the ballads necessarily, but brave souls nonetheless. They fought through the nightmare-twisted lands, facing creatures that should only exist in the deepest fears. Their journey led them to the Empress's palace. Now, this palace was a marvel, a place where magic and invention danced together. The Empress had built strange, wonderful things there. Machines powered by steam and crystal, built with both gears and glyphs. And within this palace, she had a great towering machine, a protector. Some called it a mech, a giant warrior of metal and magic. The heroes, seeing the only way to strike at the heart of the problem, climbed into this incredible machine. Can you imagine, little one? Sitting in the head of a giant golem of steel and arcane energy, ready to face a god's fragment? They rode it out, a beacon against the nightmare tide, and they faced Zarthus himself, a battle for the very soul of Edoran. They fought valiantly, and in the end, they defeated the demon, shattering its hold. The Empress began to stir from her nightmare sleep, and slowly, the land began to heal. The giant mech, battered and strained by the impossible fight, collapsed in an explosion of steam and light. The heroes, by some miracle, survived, but their machine was gone. The first great test had been endured. After that, things didn't just snap back to normal, mind you. A land ravaged by nightmares takes time to mend. People were scared. Homes were ruined. My own family helped where we could, planting new crops, helping rebuild a neighbor's barn. It was a time of quiet effort, but the scars remained. Then came the trouble on the island of Neil. Now, Neil is far to the east, across a wide stretch of water from our shining city of Zodra. Zodra, ruled by the kind and strong Queen Emelina Bright Harvest. Yes, the same Queen Emelina we have today, though she was younger then. Queen Emelina is the heart of the West, a beacon of hope, but even her light couldn't reach everywhere. Neil was on the very edge of her influence, a wilder place. Reports came back of trouble there, mayors taking bribes, gangs pushing people around. Queen Emelina sent heroes, perhaps some of the same ones who faced Zarthus, or perhaps new ones drawn to help the land. Their mission: sort out Neil. When they got there, they found it wasn't just simple bandits. Oh no, there was a rot at the core, a cult operating in secret, pulling the strings of the gangs to cause distractions. And their true purpose was terrifying. They were trying to summon a beast, a demon even, with promises of power. The leader of this cult, he was an old man, someone who had once been close to Queen Emelina herself, even helping to raise her. And he knew a secret, a heavy burden Queen Emelina carried, a curse passed down through her bloodline. He believed this demon, this summoned beast, could lift that curse, even though he knew dealing with demons was like playing with vipers. He thought the risk was worth it, that this curse was so terrible. Something about plunging the land into eternal darkness, the whispers said, that any price was worth paying to remove it. The heroes confronted him. I don't know the full details, the fight, the struggle. But the story goes, in his final moments as he fell, his blood touched the ground, and something in the twisted ritual was completed. The beast was unleashed. But that wasn't the only strange thing happening on Neil. In the marketplace there were these crystals. Just small, odd things at first, maybe sold as trinkets. But as the trouble grew, as the air filled with dark magic, these crystals began to grow. Not slowly, like plants, but quickly, aggressively. They burst out of the ground, out of buildings, sharp and menacing. And they did something horrifying. They absorbed life. Anyone too close, anyone who fell nearby, their very essence, their soul energy, was drawn into these growing crystals. And the more life they absorbed, the faster they grew, the more powerful they became. At first, they were mindless, but as they fed, they gained awareness. They started to think, to communicate. They became a strange, powerful entity, a crystal mind growing across the island. The heroes, caught between a rampaging demon and these ravenous crystals, made a desperate gamble. They somehow communicated with the crystal entity. They convinced it to grow away from the island into the vast ocean, and it did. It surged outward, a tidal wave of glittering crystal. And as it grew, it enveloped the newly summoned demon. The crystal, with its sheer explosive growth, crushed and absorbed the demon, taking its power, becoming something even more immense and terrifying. Now, the threat wasn't just the demon or the cult. It was this colossal, sentient crystal organism that threatened to cover the entire world. The heroes had to stop it. They found the origin point, the very first crystal that had started it all, deep within the island. And in a final, desperate act, they cut off its connection to the air, to the world, somehow starving the monstrous growth. The crystal organism fractured, its immense power dispersing. But not entirely. Any crystal that had absorbed life, that had tasted a soul, now held a spark of that power, of that essence. These weren't just rocks anymore. They were power crystals, or soul crystals as some called them. Holding one felt like holding a piece of the storm, granting strange abilities, like the old legends of the Force from before the age of magic. They made people strong, fast, able to weave minor magics. News travels fast, even across seas. The word of these power crystals on Neil spread like wildfire. The elves in their forests, the dwarves in their mountains, the fierce orcs, the proud dragonborn, even Queen Emelina and her people in Zodra, everyone heard, and everyone wanted them. So, the world converged on Neil. It became a battleground. Elven ships sailed, dwarf mining legions mobilized, orc warbands gathered, dragonborn scouts took to the skies. Queen Emelina, ever protective of her people and the land, decided the crystals were too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. She needed to secure them, protect them. And who better to send than the heroes who had already faced down nightmares and demons? They were tasked with building an army, gathering forces to defend Neil against the coming tide. They travelled to port cities, recruiting sailors and soldiers, building a fleet. They journeyed into the mountains, finding some dwarves who distrusted the others, forging uneasy alliances. They even found help from unexpected places. A rogue tiefling, a demon-blooded woman from the very cities where Zarthus was said to have come from, who saw the chaos as an opportunity to gain power within the demon realm by weakening its forces elsewhere. She offered strange aid, whispers and diversions, helping the heroes in her own twisted way. The battles were fierce. The heroes leading Queen Emelina's forces clashed with the orcs first, a brutal fight on the beaches and in the jungles of Neil. The elves, seeing the orcs as a common enemy, joined the fight briefly, a tense but effective alliance. The dwarves, or some of them anyway, had already made their move, striking a deal with the approaching dragonborn. "Fly over our mountains," they told the dragonborn. "We won't stop you if you give us a share of the crystals." The dwarves hoped the dragonborn would do the fighting, and they'd just collect their share. Clever, in a greedy dwarf way. The dragonborn fleet, a terrifying sight of airships and winged warriors, was on its way. Now, during all this running around, gathering allies, the heroes somehow came into possession of these keys. Not metal keys, but shimmering things you held in the air. Turn one, and a doorway would just appear, a shimmering portal. These weren't just any doors either. They led to the very heart of the other race's power, the throne rooms of the elven, dwarven, and orc capitals. An incredible advantage, a way to move around the world in an instant. The elves desperately wanted these keys, but the heroes, wisely, held on to them. The main battle for Neil was against the orcs, with the elves helping to drive them back. The dwarves had pulled back, leaving the fighting to the dragonborn. Neil was held for now, but the dragonborn threat was still looming. Queen Emelina, seeing the fragile peace, evacuated the survivors from Neil and placed the island under quarantine. These crystals were too dangerous, she knew, too tempting. They needed to be protected, kept out of the wrong hands. But the dragonborn still wanted them. Their fleet was still coming. So, Queen Emelina had another plan. She brought out a marvel from the Empress's palace archives. Plans for a giant dirigible, a grand airship. Bare bones at first, but something the heroes could use and even upgrade as they went. Their mission: intercept the Dragonborn fleet in the north, in the treacherous sky lanes above the Dwarven Mountains, and stop them from reaching Nil. So, the heroes took to the skies in this magnificent airship. They flew north, into the jagged peaks and swirling clouds where the dwarves burrowed. They found the tensions there were high. Some dwarves hated the Dragonborn. Some were allied with them for the promise of crystals. It was a dangerous place, full of rocky outcrops and hidden fortresses. And it was there, in the ancient, unforgiving mountains, that they stumbled upon something else. Old ruins, crumbling stones that spoke of a civilization long gone. The legends whispered that this place, and many others like it, were laid to waste by vampires. Not just simple monsters, but powerful beings who had once lorded over the land, almost drinking the world dry. 1,000 years ago, the story said, the vampires came close to conquering everything, but somehow they vanished, defeated, though how was a mystery. And this is where the darkest secret lies, little one. That terrible curse on Queen Emelina, the one the cult leader on Nil tried to remove. It's the curse of the vampire. She is a descendant, a hidden heir to the last of that ancient bloodthirsty line. That's her burden, her secret shame. The heroes, I don't think they fully understood it at the time, just heard the old tales of vampires and saw the ruins. They didn't connect it all up, not yet anyway. But the mission pressed on. The dirigible soared, engaging the Dragonborn fleet high above the mountains. A chaotic, desperate battle of airships, fire, and dragon breath. And in the midst of the aerial combat, something terrible happened. I don't know exactly how. Maybe a stray blast, maybe a crash into a mountainside. But the fighting disturbed something ancient and vast. Deep within those mountains, the dwarves had been keeping a secret of their own. A slumbering titan, a colossal being, ancient and powerful, kept asleep and docile by the dwarves who constantly fed it, bringing it massive stones from deep within the earth. It was a delicate balance, keeping the giant fed and happy so it wouldn't wake and rampage. The aerial battle, the noise, the destruction, it shattered that ancient peace. The Titan awoke. It rose from the mountains like a mountain itself gaining legs. And it was furious. It didn't care about Dragonborn or humans or dwarves. It just saw threats, nuisances that had woken it up. It thrashed and roared, tearing through the sky, smashing airships, swatting dragons aside like flies. It utterly ravaged the Dragonborn fleet. And in its blind fury, it also struck the heroes' dirigible. The magnificent airship, their hope of stopping the Dragonborn, was torn apart and sent crashing down. The heroes, they survived the crash, but they were stranded. Stranded high in the unforgiving northern mountains, with a rampaging titan nearby, and their ride home in splinters. They were out of the game, stuck up there, far from the rest of the world. But the Dragonborn threat to Nil was gone, for now. Their fleet was in ruins, smashed by an angry giant. That's where things stood. Heroes stranded, a land recovering from nightmares and the brink of war, and a new, terrifying monster loose in the north. The world was battered, trying to find its feet. But Edoran's trials weren't over, not by a long shot. Time, little one, is a river, but sometimes the banks overflow and things spill from one part to another. Far, far in the future, Thousands upon thousands of years from that day, Edoran was a desolate place. A desert, endless sand stretching as far as the eye could see, with only a single giant dead tree standing as a monument to what once was. A lonely, silent world. Scholars from that future, travelling through the vast emptiness of space in magical ships, stumbled upon this forgotten Edoran. And somehow they triggered something, a last desperate magic left by the dying land. A portal ripped open, and it sent those future scholars back to our time, to Edoran's present day, arriving just after the Dragonborn fleet had been destroyed and the heroes stranded. Imagine their shock, finding a world vibrant and alive, not the dead desert they knew. They looked like ghosts wearing strange clothes, speaking in odd ways. But they were scholars. They had read the history. They knew this time. They knew it was a critical moment. They were met by two figures who seemed to know what was happening. A being of pure light, an angel of hope, and that same rogue tiefling woman who had helped Queen Emelina's forces on Neil, drawn by the strange energies. They told the scholars, "This is it. This is the turning point. We can't hold the portal, but you must save Edoran's future." And then they vanished, leaving the bewildered scholars alone. And that's when the next horror began. A sickness, a plague. People began to twist, to turn into mindless, ravenous monsters, zombies. They rose from the ground, shambled from their homes, a tide of the undead sweeping across the land. It wasn't just one place. It was happening everywhere. A sudden, terrifying outbreak. The cities, already reeling from the previous calamities, began to collapse under the sheer weight of the undead horde. The future scholars, these people who knew history but weren't necessarily warriors, were thrown into a fight for their lives against this impossible tide. They learned that the source of this terrible magic was a tower. A dark, wicked-looking tower that had just appeared, rising from the swamps to the north. Within it, an evil wizard was channeling this power, using a potent, corrupted orb to fuel the zombie plague. So, these scholars, these people of books and learning, had to become fighters. They battled their way through the shambling dead, making their way north to the swamp, to the tower. They faced the evil wizard, fighting not just for their lives, but for the future of a world that wasn't even their own. A world they had only read about. They confronted the wizard, a desperate struggle in that dark place. I don't know if they defeated him with force or trickery, but the story goes the wizard fell, and the corrupted orb, the source of the plague, was destroyed, shattering within the collapsing tower. And just like that, the magic holding the zombies together dissolved. The undead fell, lifeless husks once more. The plague ended, but the land, Edoran, it was devastated. It had been scarred by the Empress's nightmares, ripped apart by the war for Neil, and now gnawed to the bone by the zombie apocalypse. Cities were ruins, towns were empty. The land was quiet, too quiet, licking its wounds. The heroes were stranded in the north. The Dragonborn fleet was gone. The Titan roamed somewhere, and the future scholars had saved the day, but left behind a broken, weary world. And that, little one, that brings us to today. 100 years have passed since those dark days. The world has tried to rebuild, to forget, but the tales are still whispered. The scars are still there. The Empress is safe, but her magic felt the strain. The crystals on Neil are still guarded, silent power waiting, The vampires. Are they truly gone? The Titan sleeps again, maybe, or perhaps just wanders. The scholars are gone, back to their time or lost to ours. I don't know. This land, our Edoran, has endured so much. And the future? Well, little one, the future is unwritten. And sometimes old wounds fester, old secrets refuse to stay buried, and new dangers arise from the ashes of the old. This is the world we live in now, built on the bones of those stories.